Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Allie Kane, and I will be the moderator for our presentation. I am part of Fluor's Office of Technology, which focuses on using science and innovative engineering technology to build a better world. Our engineers, designers, and experts, our people, are at the core of our success. As with the other webinars, this will be a technical presentation. Our subject matter expert today will talk about safety instrumented systems, key factors for design and operation. So now I'd like to introduce our experts. So with us today is Fluor Fellow Amit Aglave. Amit is a graduate in instrumentation engineering. He has 25 years of experience in process industry and specializes in the design and engineering of safety instrumented systems, SIS, according to the functional safety standards of the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC 61508 and 61511. He is a certified functional safety expert and certified Industry 4.0 assessor. His vast experience includes SIS lifecycle activities for design of systems like emergency shutdown devices, burner management systems, fire and gas systems, and high integrity pressure protection systems. Outside of work, Amit enjoys playing tennis and driving through the mountains. Joining Amit today is Veronica Luna. Veronica has more than 17 years of experience with Fluor and in the engineering and design industry. She has been part of project functional safety teams that ensure safety lifecycle requirements per IEC are met during the design stage of projects. She is a TÜV certified functional safety engineer and recognized as one of Fluor's global subject matter experts in hazard and risk analysis. In her spare time, Veronica spends as much time as she can with her husband, 4 children, and with her fur babies. So before we get into today, Fluor has a very strong safety-driven culture, and as such, it is customary for us to start our meetings with a brief safety topic. However, as a topic for this webinar is essentially an hour-long safety and design topic, we're going to proceed directly into the main topic. So to set the context and briefly explain how SIS takes part in ensuring facility process safety, I would like to invite Veronica, the technical moderator for our session today, to unmute her line before Amit dives into the presentation. Vero, take it away.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. So before we move on to discussing details regarding safety instrumented systems, let's briefly discuss what is process safety. So process safety is the application of protective systems to ensure that a facility is operated safely to protect personnel and avoid adverse impact to the environment and assets. So operations in the process industry involves different chemicals to produce useful intermediates and products. And the reactions generally happen at extreme process conditions. And these reactions are quick, and even a small lapse in safeguarding can be devastating. So what happens if the process goes out of control? So we have seen this, what could happen if conditions quickly spiral out of control in the past incidents. To name a few, we have Bhopal in India, Deepwater Horizon in Gulf of Mexico, Buncefield in UK, and these accidents have shaken the community and resulted to a stronger call for robust safeguarding and stricter regulatory requirements. Now let's look at this quote from Sir Brian Appleton to further describe the importance of process safety. Safety is not an intellectual exercise to keep us in work. It is a matter of life and death. It is the sum of our contributions to safety management that determines whether the people we work with live or die. True, right? So how do we ensure that the plant operates safely? One of the ways is to implement active and passive safeguarding systems for stable and safe operations. The safeguarding system, based on programmable electronic system, is termed as the Safety Instrumented System, or SIS, which will be the focus of our webinar today. SIS is a combination of hardware and software. It is configured to take automatic actions when the process deviates from the normal operating range. So the safeguarding functions implemented within the SIS is termed as safety instrumented functions, or SIF, and it has two major attributes, which is the functional requirement and the integrity requirement. The functional requirements cover the questions such as what equipment to protect, how to protect it, what are the measurements required, and what are the final control elements which needs to take action to bring process to a safe state, and what is the process safety time available to perform the action. And then an example of functional requirements is in a tank. A SIF is typically provided for protection against high level to avoid overfill scenario. So the tank level is measured, and if the level crosses the set limit, the inlet valve is closed. So to prevent overfill, the SIF has approximately 5 minutes to act, which is the process safety time. So the next attribute that I've mentioned is the integrity requirements, and they are expressed in terms of safety integrity level, or SIL, and it's ranging from SIL 1 to SIL 4. So based on the assessment of risk associated with a scenario, which is typically done in a SIL assignment workshop, the risk reduction required to achieve is determined. This will then provide the integrity requirement for the SIF expressed as SIL. From our previous example, for the high-level SIF in the tank, it can be SIL 2 or SIL 3, depending on the risk associated with the overfill scenario. IEC 61511 is the main standard referred to when we talk about SIS in the process industry. It provides the life cycle approach, as you can see in the slide, for the design and the operation of the SIS. So basically, the SIS life cycle is all about the journey undertaken from SIS design to operation with an endeavor to achieve process safety. So this safety life cycle is known to most. But let me ask you this. Is the design and engineering of the SIS only the important phase in the life cycle? What are the other phases that affect the SIS design? Does the maintenance strategy of the SIS affect its integrity? Why is the structured approach necessary? Why is the SIS life cycle important? So to answer its importance, let's look at some of the findings from the past incidents and see how they are associated with the life cycle phases. So this is Texas City in 2005. The CSB report for refinery fire and explosion indicates that there is no safety interlock for high level in a raffinate splitter column, a miss out in phase 2. 2009, fire in multiple tanks in one of the oil terminal in India. The investigation report points at shortcomings in design and engineering specifications of facilities and equipment, a miss out in phase 4. Refinery heat exchanger catastrophic failure or rupture in 2010. The CSB report indicates one of the causes of this unfortunate event is insufficient process instrumentation on 2 out of 6 identical heat exchangers. Again, a miss out in phase 4. Olefins plant reboiler rupture in 2013. The CSB report mentions one of the key lessons is the requirement to have a robust management of change procedures to review and analyze hazards in the entire process for the proposed change. This is a miss out in phase 7. So as you can see, some of the findings from the past incidents can be mapped against the phases of the life cycle. This is the reason why we should fully understand and properly implement the requirements of the SIS life cycle. So with this introduction, I would like to turn over to our functional safety expert, Amid Aglave. Amit, in this slide, there are some statements that we hear over the years. In this webinar today, we would like you to clarify misconceptions around functional safety and take us through and highlight what you think are the key aspects of SIS life cycle, which are typically missed but are very important.
Thanks for setting up the context, Veronica. Yes, definitely. There are still a lot of misconceptions around SIS and SIL. The functional safety standards, such as IEC 61508 and IEC 61511, are good guides for designing of SIS. But understanding these in detail, holistic implementation strategy involving all key stakeholders is necessary. Each stakeholder like end user, engineering consultant, EPC contractor, SIS and instrumentation vendors, they leave their mark in the design or operation of the SIS. How well the functional safety requirements are understood and implemented will decide the success for process safeguarding mission. As such, the requirements in the standard are exhaustive, but let's go through some of the key aspects of each life cycle phase to understand the requirements rather than going by the notions which are expressed in the statements on the slide. So what is the first step to begin? Many people say that hazard and risk analysis is first step in functional safety implementation. But to me, HRA is not the first step of the life cycle. The first and most important of activities begin with the management of functional safety and planning. Do take a note, management of functional safety involves identifying activities to be carried out and allocation of organization and resources to perform these activities. Assign personnel with adequate competence and assess, manage and maintain records for the competence. Do not assign tasks to personnel based on availability, rather it should be based on the required skills. And this is true for all stakeholders. A question, how do you manage competence in your organization? Think over it. So coming to safety plan, it defines all the activities to be carried out related to functional safety. It is one of the most important documents necessary for successful implementation and operation of the SIS. No plan is like plan to fail. So without a plan, can you ensure that all the necessary activities, checks and balances are done for any of the phase? Definitely not, right? Is developing safety plan a one-time activity? No, safety plan is a live document and it has to be updated as per the phase and organization performing that particular phase. So how do you structure the safety plan? I recommend to have an overall safety plan and a phase-wise safety plan. These plans should be developed for execution requirements of the phase. Further, it is also important to understand that who is responsible to develop the safety plan. The overall safety plan should be developed by the owner. This should be a guide on minimum requirements as per the regulatory and the company requirements as per the location of the plant. It defines the requirements for SIS and non-SIS based risk reduction methodologies to be adopted. Further, this plan provides guidance for development of phase-wise safety plans. Though I have seen a desire from clients or operating companies to get main EPC contractor to develop phase-wise safety plan, this approach can lead to things falling through the cracks. My recommendation is to get responsible party for a particular phase to develop it. The plan should include competence requirements, activities which need to be performed, verification and testing needed for successful execution of a particular phase. This would mean for Fluor, the main EPC contractor develops safety plan for the phases 1 to phase 4. But the SIS supplier, who is also executing major part of phase 4, should have a sub-plan for their scope of work. And similarly, phases 5 to phase 8, I recommend that it should be developed by the owner organization. Inputs to phase 5 can be provided by the EPC contractor. The next steps in the life cycle are hazard and risk analysis and SIL assessment. These steps lay the foundation for the development of the SIS. The participants of these studies should have knowledge of the process, knowledge of the operational conditions, and knowledge of the risk in operations. Though the HAZOP and SIL assessment studies are done for long now, executing the HAZOP and SIL assessment studies can turn out to be a big challenge. Why? These two studies struggle with having right resources, have ill-defined criteria for the studies, the reference values to be used for some of the important parameters such as turnaround period, definitions for the safety barriers, definitions to the loss of assets, personal and environment, durations of the study, and there are many more factors which are not properly defined. Did you experience the same? So how to avoid such challenges? For each of these study, develop and have a pre-agreement on the terms of reference covering the technical as well as disciplinary requirements. This will avoid having endless debates on simple terms and help focus on the main objectives of the studies. The terms of reference should contain proper definition of tolerable risk, data on the initiating event frequency, allowed safety barrier and its risk reduction factor which can be used, plant manning during normal operations, and of course, the credit for the operator responses based on the time available to operators for responding to the alarms. There are many such parameters which should be clearly defined in this terms of reference document before the actual assessment begins. For the hazard and risk analysis at Fluor, we follow a stepwise approach. The 3 steps are based on different stages of the project. That is, as we move from the concept stage to feed and to detail engineering phases. So why? What is the benefit of this approach? It helps with early identification of hazards based on the available knowledge of the risk at that moment of time. If you know the hazards early, you can eliminate them to the extent possible. How do you do that? By selection of appropriate process technology and selection of properly rated equipment. Early knowledge of the risk also means lesser chances of late changes in the design. So we avoid cost escalation and slippages of the schedule. This approach also helps to achieve an inherent safe design than managing the risk with too many safeguards around. So what approach do you follow and how do you address the challenges if hazards are identified late? Just a question to think of. So moving on, post hazard and risk analysis, next important phase is SIL assessment. Many times, SIL assessment studies are conducted back to back or integrated with HAZOP. This means that a clear HAZOP report is not available. Incomplete HAZOP could mean inadequate understanding of the scenarios for the SIS. Is it a good practice? Definitely not. It may result into missed requirements or a higher requirements on the SIS. Another critical aspect for SIL assessment is clear definition of the final elements and process safety time. Normally, a SIF has primary action and secondary actions to operate additional final elements. The actuation of primary element should be sufficient for mitigating the hazard, right? But what happens if all the final elements are listed as primary actions? The SIF will have an unrealistic final element voting. Can the SIL target be achieved with such design? No, definitely not. Further, knowing process safety time is a key requirement during the SIL assessment. It's not only required for SIL assessment, but also important for procurement of the devices. We understood the details of the importance of the PST in our last webinar by my colleague, Paul Garlick. Lastly, I want to ask a question here. Have you seen that post-SIL assessment, there is a sense of discomfort in some of the participants in the meeting. Lower or higher SIL rating than what is there in individual's mind will result in a restart of the whole discussions. Sometimes there is a vested interest to get more hardware from the lump sum EPC contractor, or sometimes the EPC contractor trying to save cost. And sometimes it's a discomfort from the end user that more manning would be required in operations to manage the life cycle requirements. This is not right. The SIL assessment should happen only based on the true risk without having any such bias in mind. Moving further, the next important phase involves development of safety requirements specification. A good SRS is like a knowledge bank or data sheet for the SIF and covers all the important attributes for the SIF. A good SRS provides solid basis for the design and verification of the SIS and is a good guide for commissioning and maintenance of the SIS. For development of SRS, it is important to know the 3 Ws and H of the SRS. The first W addresses the requirement for who develops the SRS and keep it updated. Remember, SRS is a live document and need appropriate updates during different phases, and a stakeholder of those phases should understand this requirement. The second W addresses what should be the content of the SRS. The section 10 of the IEC 61511 part 1 is a good guide on the content requirement. You do not have to look elsewhere. The third W addresses when should be the SRS developed. The basic framework shall be completed post completion of SIL assessment. Thereafter, updates are required post SIL verification or any changes in the design or operational phase. Lastly, the H addresses how to ensure the correctness of the SRS. The safety plan should adequately address the verification of the SRS post completion of phase 3 or after any major updates. We now move on to the design phase. In this phase, the SIS is designed as per the SRS by implementing multiple SIFs as per the functional and integrity requirements. The first step is to develop SIS architecture, keeping in mind segregation of the logic solvers for multiple trains, similar or major equipments on smaller units, and segregation based on the applications like emergency shutdown, burner management, or high integrity pressure protection systems. Next step is to develop the specifications, ensure covering requirements such as hardware fault tolerance, behavior on detection of faults, diagnostic capabilities, and maximum allowed processor cycle time. Also ensure to cover requirements of cybersecurity. We have seen major cyber attacks on the control and safety systems in the recent past. The specifications for the field instrumentation, they should include the operational and environmental conditions. And for the valves, opening or closing time and the partial stroke test requirements are some of the important points to be taken care of. A key decision to be made for SIS components is prior use or use of certified devices. Before procurement, make sure the prior use data or data such as certificate, its associated report, and safety manual, they are thoroughly reviewed to check the suitability for the application and conformance to the integrity requirements. The operator interface requirements include on how SIS data is presented to the operators. Maintenance requirements include bypass and override philosophies. Carefully develop philosophies to avoid misuse of bypass for more availability. Limitations should be in place to prevent violation of the safety requirements. SIL verification is an important task to check that the SIL targets are met with the procured devices. What do you do if the targets are not met? Adjust the test, proof testing or partial stroke testing frequency. And of course, that should be to a practical duration, or modify the SIF architecture and repeat these steps until the SIL target is met. Lastly, testing is basically involves the factory acceptance test to prove the design requirements are met. We now move to the next important phase where the design system is shipped to the site and installation activities begin. So before installation and commissioning, the safety plan and procedures need to be frozen. Take special care in ensuring that the recommendations from vendors on installation and commissioning procedures are included. The standard as such has provided very little details on the requirements of this phase. But some of the important points for this phase, what I would recommend are ensure that all the equipments are installed in line with the procedures and there is no damage caused in transportation. These checks need to be done both before and after the system installation and interconnections. All the carryover work from the factory acceptance testing should be completed and the records updated. All the field equipments and interfaces of SIS, example like BPCS, fire and gas, BMS, should be connected and operational. Ensure that all the commissioning records are properly documented. And lastly, all the non-conformances need to be resolved before you declare that the system commissioning is completed. Post-installation and commissioning, validation of SIS is performed as per the approved procedure to ensure that the installed system meets the functional requirements. Completion of validation is a critical milestone in the life cycle of the system before the plant startup. Validation for the SIS includes all the tests for the SIS, including testing of interfaces, interaction with BPCS, sequence checks if applicable, operation of all bypass, overrides, and reset functions. It's vital that the post-validation, the system is normalized. This includes removal of all the bypasses, forces, disabling of forcing feature, restoring the timers and counters to the design value. For field instrumentation, ensure that they are operational with all temporary arrangements for testing removed. An important requirement for in the life cycle is verification. Do understand, verification and SIL verification are different activities. Also note that the verification is not a sequential activity as some of the other phases. Verification applies to all the phases and shall be performed after completion of a phase or completion of an important activity within a phase. Verification or design reviews is performed to ensure that the desired outcome of the phase or activity is achieved. It also ensures that the data for next phase is available. Any finding or shortcoming, corrective actions taken, and re-verification shall be properly documented. For example, post completion of hazard and risk assessment, verification shall be done to ensure that the expected outcome is achieved and the results from the HRA can be used in next phase, that is SIL assessment. So verification can be either a paper review or it can be testing by simulation. Verification for the logic solver vendor developed function blocks is an example of verification by simulation. Another important aspect of the life cycle is functional safety assessment. FSA shall be carried out to demonstrate that the SIS meets the functional as well as integrity requirements. FSA requirements include confirmation that the required phases are executed and all the recommendations applied. FSA is also carried out to ensure that SIS is designed as per the SRS and the procedure for change management, operation and maintenance are in place. It also ensures that the validation of the system is completed as per the plan. So when to have FSA? During engineering stage, FSA is carried out at the end of stage 1 and stage 2. At site, FSA or pre-startup safety review is done after stage 3. Before the startup, ensure that all the FSA recommendations are appropriately closed. Further, FSA is done periodically during stage 4 and always before carrying out any modification work. A key point to note here is the assessor who is performing the FSA shall be independent and not working on any of the activities. A vital requirement of the standard is competence. This is always debated and most misunderstood aspect of the requirements. I've seen that many times in past. Competence doesn't necessarily mean certification. Though the trainings for certifications offered by various agencies, they impart concepts of the functional safety. Certification without experience becomes a mere checkbox compliance. Assessing competence is done to ensure that the personnel involved understand all the aspects of the functional safety and can apply these to the phases they are involved in. Managing competence involves documentation to demonstrate competence either through experience, education details, professional trainings, and certification of the personnel. Training shall be planned to address any gaps before the personnel is actually involved in any activity or a phase. The personnel involved in activities of verification, validation, and assessment also should have adequate competence to perform these tasks, apart from what we discussed, to be independent. So to recap, listed here are some of the key points for design phase one must keep in mind. All right, we then move to the next phase, phase 6 to 8 of the safety lifecycle, in which the engineered system is put into the service for safeguarding of the process. These we term as operational phase. So before the operational phase begins, planning for this crucial phase and operation and maintenance procedures shall be in place. Typically, this should be completed before the end of phase 5. The data from the safety requirement specification shall be used as a guideline to plan the maintenance and testing of the SIS. The only objective of this phase is maintaining and sustaining the integrity of the SIS. Easier said than done, isn't it? So let's see what are the key activities to achieve this objective. The key activities in this phase are indicated on the slide. It is important to establish a framework and plan for performing all these activities. Let's review each of these activities in the upcoming slides. In scheduled maintenance, apart from performing routine activities, important questions to be answered are: is log of all the maintenance activities and findings maintained? Is routine visual inspection done to ensure that no unauthorized modification or visible deterioration is there? Is the application version of the program and audit trail log being checked to ensure that there is no unauthorized modifications done? Are you timely replacing the devices with shorter useful lifetime than the plant design mission time? Remember, using devices beyond the useful lifetime means the devices may not be available to perform the safeguarding function. In breakdown maintenance, apart from the repair or replacement of the faulty component, important questions to be answered are: do you analyze the reason for failure and verify if the failure rates are within the failure rates claimed by the vendors? Do you analyze if the failures are due to incorrect considerations in the design phase? And lastly, do you ensure scheduled maintenance is being carried out at set frequency to avoid any breakdown? If yes, these activities would help you to avoid future unplanned shutdowns as well as ensure safer operations. Health monitoring and testing can reveal important aspects on the performance of the SIS. Important questions to be answered here are: do you make the use of diagnostic data of SIS to analyze the SIS performance? Do you recalibrate the maintenance strategy based on diagnostics to avoid unplanned shutdowns? Do you perform the proof test and partial stroke test at a frequency as defined in the SRS? A word of caution, if testing is delayed beyond the specified time, it means the lower risk reduction factor and also probably lower SIL than the designed SIL. Is it acceptable? No, definitely not. Maintaining logs of testing and diagnostic data helps create a history on the performance of the devices. It will not only help in the operational and maintenance phase, but also helps during any next projects, as well as it can be a feedback to the vendors for improvements in their products. Remember that the process safety is a collaborative approach. To understand this, let's take an example of any anomaly which is detected in Logic Solver. When reported back to the vendor checks and issues a software patch update for addressing this issue. It benefits not only the vendor, but the multiple installations within your facility, as well as others who are using the same make and model of the Logic Solver. Obsolescence management shall be a key part of the maintenance strategy. Periodically review the availability of spares. Though the support agreements with vendors are in place for around 15 to 20 years, lack of availability of electronic components make it difficult for vendors to support after some time. So utilized spares should be repurchased within a good amount of time to avoid any operational challenges. Management of change is an important activity for making any minor or major changes to the SIS. Note that the modification and decommissioning have the similar requirements. Before making actual modification or decommissioning, look out for the answers to the questions such as, are you following all the relevant life cycle steps? Are you carrying risk assessment and preparing a step-by-step guideline for a modification or decommissioning? Are you updating the affected documents? Are you obtaining authorization to perform the modification? And very important, have you performed the functional safety assessment? Competence management in operational phase includes trainings to impart knowledge on functional safety, as well as task-based trainings. Also, training for new resources for familiarity with the implemented system, familiarity with the documentation, and also the task-based trainings are just some of the key factors. We know that SRS is a live document and must be updated for any change during operational phase. The responsibility for updating SRS shall be part of the operation and maintenance plan. Before changing the components, as we discussed in breakdown maintenance or obsolescence, reperform SIL verification, update the SRS, and all the relevant test procedures to ensure that the integrity requirements are met. Audits and FSA are important aspects of the SIS. Audits shall be carried out to ensure that all the activities we discussed are carried out as per the procedures and schedule and are also well documented. Functional safety assessment shall be carried out periodically to ensure that the design considerations are met and SIS is being managed and verified as per the IEC 61511 requirements. So what are the important considerations for audit and FSA one should look in? Whether it is performed by independent person not working on the SIS activities, is it performed to ensure the management of functional safety and verification is being performed or not? And it is performed to verify that the test results and findings are appropriately reported and recommendations implemented in a timely manner. Do take a note that audit and FSA are two different activities. Audit is checking off the procedural compliance, whereas FSA is a technical activity for compliance to design requirements. A question I would like you to review: at your facility, are you conducting audits and FSA for the SIS? So apart from all these important activities what we discussed, a very important aspect in the operational phase is requirements for the re-review of the hazards and risks. When a re-review should be required, So if the data from experience in operations vary to the data used in design, if there are changes to the regulatory requirements or corporate guidelines, which might result in change to the definitions of tolerable risk, experience from incidents within a facility or other plants or other companies, variation to design consideration with respect to the occupancy in the plant or surrounding community, any changes to the feed mix, or change to the philosophy of storage and handling of the hazardous material. So all these points will be pointing towards the re-review of the hazard and risk. Again, a question I would like you to review: is the hazard and risk review being performed at your facility? So to recap, listed here are some of the key points for operational phase one must keep in mind. So let's get back to the questions where we started. So SIL is to be determined in SIL assessment study in phase 2. The SIL value is based on the risk reduction to be achieved by an individual SIF and is not applicable for the complete facility. Functional as well as integrity requirements, both are important. Further, verification, testing, and functional safety assessment help to remove any errors in the design. More hardware doesn't necessarily means more safety. It may be more failures, more maintenance, and more cost. Be careful. Optimum definitions based on what is at risk should be the deciding factor on how much hardware is actually required. Not only the certification, but fit for use in the intended application, the failure rate data, the useful lifetime are some of the important parameters which are to be checked. Where do you get this data? Normally the safety manual of the product from the vendors that will have such data. The functional safety standards, IEC 61508 and IEC 61511 are good guides for the complete life cycle of the SIS. Following the standards is a step in right direction. Execute all the safety lifecycle phases holistically, manage competence, and adhere to the requirements of audits, FSA, and verification throughout all the phases of the life cycle. So yeah, that's all I have for today. Wish you all success in your role for contribution towards the journey of achieving process safety. Ali, back to you.
Thanks, Amit, and thanks, Veronica. We do have a number of questions that have come in, so gonna go ahead and go through these Q&A. As a reminder to those still listening in, feel free to type any questions you have to the Q&A. We do have about 15 minutes left, and we'll hopefully get to as many as possible. So let's get started here. On slide 17, it was mentioned that a 3-step hazard and risk assessment is recommended by Fluor. What happens if Fluor is not involved in the earlier phases?
Right, yeah. So we first review if there are reports from the earlier phases, and if they are available or not, we develop a detailed terms of reference for conducting the hazard and risk analysis, the phase where or the stage where we are involved in. Veronica, would you like to add further to this question?
Sure, Amit. So typically projects we have, first we conduct the hazard on the early stage of the project, and this provides high level identification of the hazards present in the facility. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be on a concept stage, even if in detailed engineering, the project does not have hazard yet. We still recommend for the project to consider that because of what I've mentioned, because it gives the team more understanding of the hazards in the facility. And then for the PHA level 2, Basically, that's during the basic engineering phase. And if we're not involved and there's nothing that was done during the feed phase, and we were involved in a later stage of the project, like in detailed engineering phase, we could do the HAZOP on the early stage. And then if there are some changes after HAZOP, then we manage that under the management of change process.
Thanks, Vero. Thanks, Amit. Hopefully that answered the question. But we are going to stay on slide 17, actually, because there's a follow-on question there. So the next question is, with 3 PHA levels, are these 3 PHA meetings or discussions held with the client?
Yeah, yes, all the discussions like hazard and risk analysis or SIL assessment is basically involves end users, the EPC contractors, the licensor of the technology, the package vendor, major package vendors. So involvement of all these is important. And also from the end user organization, it should be people from their operations and maintenance. So then only the complete meaningful discussions can happen. Right, Veronica? This is your forte, and you
Yes.
can add more. Yeah.
Yes, and we need the client there, mainly because when we talk about process safety risk and the risk criteria that we use in this workshops, it's owned by the client. So and they have to provide that criteria for the workshop team to use in this assessment. So they have to be there.
And they need to be
Yeah.
there for all 3 of those meetings,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even in SIL assignment sessions, it's not here, it's on the next step, but they have to be in the SIL assignment sessions as well.
Right.
Okay.
And just to add there, basically many times the tolerable risk definition is not available, and it's always a matter of contention that from where do you get these values defined. So it's not the EPC contractor or a package vendor or licensor who will decide these values for the end user. The end user owns and has to operate the facility. So they should provide the tolerable risk values, which many times yeah is not available in the studies. And then yeah, many awkward discussions happen during all these studies because of that.
Thanks for clarifying
Yeah.
the importance of the participation of the client there, both of you.
Yeah.
Next question is going to slide 18, so just one slide forward from where we are right now. What is an appropriate process safety time to aim in when you're designing? And maybe Paul from our last webinar would be able to answer this too, but Vero or Amit, if you could take a stab, that'd be great.
Yeah, so you rightly pointed, details were covered in the last webinar, and but just to answer it here, basically the SIS should operate completely if it involves the movement of a wall, and the wall is, for example, at 8-inch wall, and typically it takes certain amount of time, like 10 to 15 seconds, based on the configuration. Of course, you can have a quick closing or opening walls to shorten that. The sensing element and the logic solver, that will happen within few milliseconds, but the final actuation element, it is the most time taking element. So all these actions should be completed, and still there should be a time left before the process goes into the hazardous state. So if example where Veronica mentioned example for tank level, so once that high level is attained, and if the filling in the tank is continued, then after how much time the tank will see basically spillage. So if that is 5 minutes, then all the actions of closing the inlet wall, stopping the pumps should practically happen like within 2.5 minutes. So you still leave some amount of margin if the wall takes a little more to close, or for any unforeseen things which might actually happen in the operation. Yeah, so I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I think
Where
so.
do you want to? Yeah.
Bear, did you have anything to
Alright.
add?
Yeah, basically the process safety time is the time you have, or the SIF has to be able to respond so that they could prevent the unwanted event. And as Amit has mentioned, that the SIF has to respond faster than the process safety time. And the process safety time is derived from the process design itself, and then also the process conditions that it's operating to, right? So that's the reason why it's very important for us to know the process safety time, so that the SIF designers would know how fast their SIF should be able to respond to prevent the unwanted event.
Yeah, so parameters like pressure and flow are fast moving parameters, and for such parameters going beyond limits, you have very little time. But the temperature or level, they are little slow moving, and you have considerable time. Yeah, as Vero said, the process behavior and reaction time, that will basically decide the process safety time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So not one clear-cut answer here, but several options.
Yeah.
All right, moving forward. The next question on slide 20. In some cases, utilization of prior use data for selecting the instruments is allowed. What should be the considerations when doing so?
Right. Yeah, that is a very important question, I believe. So yes, some organizations or regions do allow this, and it is perfectly okay to do so. No harm in that. But before doing that, as we discussed on the slide, do a thorough analysis for the suitability to your application. The prior use data might have been collected for some amount of samples, like 100 installed cases at a, for example, in a desert region. But if you're operating, having a plant in, for example, Canada, where the conditions are much colder, then the same data of prior use cannot be applied as is, right? So we need to understand the basis on how the prior use data was collected, for how much samples it was done, and how many failures were reported from the total installed cases, how the manufacturer is avoiding any systematic faults in the design. All that points one should consider and decide on whether the prior use data is fit for their applications.
Thanks, Amit.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take it up a little bit to a macro level with this question. Could you kindly explain what triggers a SIS to be included in the scope of a project?
All right. Yeah, basically, when we do the hazard and risk analysis, we know what is required for safeguarding of the process. So for simpler processes where the reactions are slow, and even if the hazardous event occurs, the risk is not great, where it harms people, or there is no harm to the environment, or it may not cause damage to the equipment, then you don't require safety functions and in turn safety instrumented systems. But the process industry, where normally we work, have very few examples of such kinds. So yeah, it depends basically on the process and the way it is operated, and yeah, the reaction time, what equipment is used. Sometimes it happens that the like example, a vessel, it is not rated to the maximum pressure. So during operations, you have to have lesser operating pressure so that the equipment doesn't get damaged. And then you have to have automatic functions to stop the process if the pressure is moving beyond certain set points. So yeah, all these considerations should be the deciding factor.
Several deciding factors. But now
Yeah.
in a project, if a client doesn't require compliance to the SIS lifecycle, how does Fluor perform the functional safety activities?
All right. Irrespective of whether a client wants that or not, though it is hard nowadays that a client will not ask, but we have all the life cycle activities, what we perform, we do follow the requirements of the standards. And Fluor has quality requirements specifications, or QRS we call, and those are again developed based on the guidelines of the IEC 61511 standards. So yeah, it's our internal systems which makes us follow these requirements even if not specifically asked for.
Got it. Okay, next question. Probably have time for one or two more. How is the audit, verification, and functional safety assessments different? Do they not have the same objective?
No, not actually. As we discussed on that slide, audits are basically, as I said, checking of the compliance to the procedures. If, for example, a proof testing of 10 SIFs had to be done at a certain interval, it just checks whether it was done at that period or not. So it is all the procedural compliance, whether you are imparting trainings at a regular interval, how you are managing the competence. All these activities would be looked into the audit. But the functional safety assessment goes into the details of all these requirements and whether they are done as per the procedures and are the objectives met. So it's more to like technical audit, we can say. So that's what is a functional safety assessment. Though the standard will allow the auditor to make some recommendations which can be part of FSA if that auditor has that competence. No harm in doing that. But yeah, theoretically, these two are different with different intent.
Thanks for that clarification. And then the last question, hopefully we can answer quickly here. In your experience, Amit and Veronica, what is the biggest challenge that the operation team faces related with the proof tests of SIFs?
All right, not easy to have a very short one. Yeah, but just quickly, the procedure should be in place. The operator should know at what frequency it has to be done. So where do you look for all those details? SRS can give you the timing wise requirements, but the procedures should be in place. What exactly needs to be done, how it is to be done, that should be clearly defined. So the person performing the test do not deviates. And again, normalizing the SIS or the component of that, the testing is completed. All that should be the part of the SIS proof test procedure, I mean.
Great. Thank you. Well, we have about a minute left, so I'm going to wrap us up here. Thank you so much for the answers, Vero and Amit, and to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you'll continue to stay informed of our Innovation Builder webinars by visiting the Innovation Builders page on fluor.com or following our social media channels using #InnovationBuilders. If you'd like us to send you email notifications of future webinars, please email us at innovationbuilders@fluor.com with opt-in in the subject line. We appreciate your attention and thank you again for dialing in. We will send out a compiled list of the Q&A within a few days, and you can expect to see the webinar recording available on demand probably mid-next week at fluor.com. If you have any questions or required additional information, please email our team and someone will get back with you. From all of us at the Innovation Builders team, have a safe day.